What's up, guys? This is Chris from draftdashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Sunday, August 29th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have an 11 game slate today, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. I like Jose Berrios with a 1% pitching advantage over a low salary batting team, the Detroit Tigers. Jose Berrios, he pitches his best ball versus righty batters, giving up a .620 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 4 righties here tonight. Now on top of that, the Tigers have only hit 18 of his last 70 pitches. That's a .257 batting average. Jose Berrios is $8,500 FanDuel salary. He's $600 more on DraftKings, projected at 33 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 3.70. His record is 8-7 on the season, pitching an average of 94 pitches per game, and he's averaging 32 fantasy points per game. Now, he's been in a slump, only scoring 15, 18, and 4 fantasy points in the last 3 games. But he's in a good spot here tonight versus the Tigers. So I like Jose Berrios here versus the Detroit Tigers. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like JT Realmuto with a 34% batting advantage over Madison Bumgarner. JT Realmuto is batting 17% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .923 OPS versus lefties, and Madison Bumgarner throws 16% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .852 OPS versus righties. And JT Realmuto is 3 for 10, batting 300 with a .833 OPS versus Bumgarner. Realmuto is $3,500 FanDuel salary, $2,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22, 9, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like JT Realmuto here versus Madison Bumgarner. Now I also like Omar Narvaez with a 39% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Griffin Jax. Omar Narvaez, he's batting 27% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .713 OPS versus righties. And Griffin Jax, he pitches 12% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a 1.020 OPS versus lefties. So he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, and there's no at-bats versus Jax yet. And Omar Narvaez is $2,700 FanDuel salary, $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Omar Narvaez here versus Griffin Jax. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. Here's a value play for you. I like Ramon Urias with a 46% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Chris Archer. Ramon Urias is batting a .870 OPS versus righties, and Chris Archer, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 50% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .802 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Archer yet, and Ramon Urias is only $2,400 FanDuel salary and $700 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 9, and 28 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Ramon Urias here versus Chris Archer. I also like Kyle Farmer with a 46% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Jesus Luzardo. Kyle Farmer is batting 33% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .860 OPS versus lefties. And Jesus Luzardo, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 13% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .896 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Luzardo yet, and Kyle Farmer is $2,900 FanDuel salary. He's $300 less on DraftKings, projected at 8.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 0, and 3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Kyle Farmer here versus Jesus Luzardo.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Alex Bregman with an 18% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Taylor Hearn. Alex Bregman is batting 30% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .969 OPS versus lefties. And Taylor Hearn, he's giving up a .629 OPS versus righties. Now, Alex Bregman is 0 for 3 versus Hearn, but he is only $3,600 FanDuel salary. He's $1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 9, and 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Alex Bregman here versus Taylor Hearn. I also like Yandy Diaz with a 51% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. Yandy Diaz is batting 5% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .785 OPS versus righties. And Spencer Watkins, he pitches 46% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a 1.025 OPS versus righties. Now, Yandy Diaz is only 1 for 5 versus Watkins, but he does have a 1 OPS because that 1 hit was for a home run. He's $3,000 FanDuel salary, $1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12, 10, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Yandy Diaz here versus Spencer Watkins. I also like Isaiah Keener-Falefa with a 23% batting advantage over Zach Greinke. Isaiah Keener-Falefa, he's batting a .660 OPS versus righties. And Zach Greinke, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 34% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .819 OPS versus righties. Now, Isaiah Keener Falefa is 6 for 12, batting .500 with a 1.167 OPS versus Greinke. He's $2,700 FanDuel salary, $1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Isaiah Keener Falefa here versus Zach Greinke. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? Looks like I gave you both of my shortstop picks. These guys are both eligible at shortstop. Kyle Farmer and Isaiah Keener Falefa. So let me look for one more pick that I can give you. And here it is. Take a look at Paul DeJong with a 6% batting advantage over Will Crowe. Paul DeJong is batting 25% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .702 OPS versus righties, and Will Crowe is giving up a 1.042 OPS versus righties. And Paul DeJong is 2 for 3 with a 1.750 OPS versus Crowe. He's only $2,600 FanDuel salary. He's $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12, 3, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Paul DeJong here versus Will Crowe. And while I'm at it, I like this pick. I didn't add him to my list before, but the more I look at it, the better it gets. So take a look at Kevin Newman with a 45% batting advantage over Kwang Hyun Kim. Kevin Newman is batting 20% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .665 OPS versus lefties. And Kwang Hyun Kim, he's giving up a .689 OPS versus righties. So he pitches 24% worse to righties as he does his other pitches. So he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters. And Kevin Newman is 3 for 7, batting a .429 batting average and a 1 OPS versus Kim. And I like this pick because Kevin Newman is only $2,300 FanDuel salary and $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 6 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 10, and 4 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Kevin Newman as a value play here versus Kwang Hyun Kim. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Juan Soto with a 57% batting advantage over Taylor Megill. Juan Soto bats 6% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.082 OPS versus righties. And Taylor Megill, he pitches his worst ball by far to lefty batters, 52% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.065 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Megill yet, and Juan Soto is $4,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.1 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 4, and 31 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Juan Soto here versus Taylor Megill. Here's another value play for you. I like Jace Peterson with a 45% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Griffin Jax. Jace Peterson is batting 33% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .796 OPS versus righties. And Griffin Jax, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 12% worse than his pitch to righties, giving up a 1.020 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Jax yet, but I like this pick because Jace Peterson is only $2,100 FanDuel salary, $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 0, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jace Peterson here versus Griffin Jax. I also like Rafael Ortega with an 89% batting advantage over Dylan Cease. Rafael Ortega bats 75% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .948 OPS versus righties. And Dylan Cease, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 14% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .841 OPS versus lefties. Rafael Ortega is 2 for 3, batting a .667 batting average and a 1.334 OPS versus Cease. He's 3,400 FanDuel salary, 900 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 32, 0, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Rafael Ortega here versus Dylan Cease. Okay, now I had to jump back to the second base position to give you this pick that I missed. This is a super value play. Looks like he's in a great spot here tonight. Take a look at Rob Refsnyder with a 67% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Aaron Ashby. Rob Refsnyder is batting 39% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .729 OPS versus lefties. And Aaron Ashby, he pitches 28% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .905 OPS versus righties. So he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, and there's no at-bats versus Ashby yet, but I like this pick because Rob Refsnyder is only 2,100 FanDuel salary. He's 100 less on DraftKings, projected at 8.7 fantasy points here tonight. Now he's only averaging 6 fantasy points per game on the season, but he's in a great spot here tonight, and it's a high-scoring game. And he scored 6, 0, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Rob Refsnyder here versus Aaron Ashby.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.